everybody who's out there and about to be logging in. We're going to give ourselves a few more minutes to get started here. It's not quite 9 o'clock on the East Coast as of yet. So we'll get started in a few minutes. Let your friends know if you guys are out there, and if they have not registered for the webinar, let them know to register so we can get them in. Otherwise, we'll get started in a few minutes, and I'll come back and introduce everybody. Again, everybody who's out there, we still have a few minutes before we're going to get started. So make sure to log in and make sure to tell your friends to log in if they haven't logged in, they've taken their MCAT. A couple of things you'll notice on your screen include a question bank there. So if you want to ask us questions as you go, please feel free to use that. That's going to be a great way to interact with a bunch of the presenters today. We'll get started in a little bit here. We're going to give ourselves a few more minutes prior to launching. Hi again, everybody out there. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. We're going to let a few more people join in here. Again, if any of your friends are out there and want to join in, make sure to let them know. Now is the time. Also, just letting you guys know that there's a question and answer function. So please feel free to ask a bunch of questions as we go here. We're also going to do a couple of different polls, and we'll have some fun tonight and get a lot of your questions answered. So let's give us about 2 more minutes here, and then we're going to get started. Good. Hi, everybody out there. Give us about another minute or so, and we're going to get started. We got a bunch of our panelists, as you guys can hopefully see now, our videos. We're going to get again started in a few minutes. We'll just get a few last-minute stragglers here to sign on, and then we're going to get diving in. All right, everybody. So first of all, I'd like to welcome everybody out there to our webinar tonight, entitled Acing the MCAT, Tips from the Pros at MedSchoolCoach and Curve Setter. So we are super excited to have you guys join us. tonight to learn a little bit about the MCAT, for us to share some MCAT experience with you. We have an awesome panel together today, full of just probably the three biggest MCAT leaders, I would say, in the world here. We got Chloe, Alex, and Ken, all of whom I'll introduce a little bit more in a second here. But I want to first just say thank you all for joining in. We're super excited to have you. We're super excited to go over a lot of tips and tricks for the MCAT. And I wanted to just let you know that at the end of this session, we're going to do a question and answer session where you can pick the brains of our panelists, myself included, about anything that's related to medical school, MCAT, preparing, applying to med school, whatever you want it to be. So feel free as you go to use the question function and drop a bunch of questions. We won't answer them as we go, but at the end we'll have a roundtable discussion and we'll be able to answer as many of those questions as possible. I also wanted to let you know that we're going to be conducting a few polls along the way to get a little bit better idea of who you guys all are. And actually, we're going to just get started with a quick poll right now. Hopefully you guys can see that on your screen right about now. And this will help us just understand who you guys are and where you guys stand in the whole process. So if you can take a second to vote on that, that would be awesome. Again, the other thing that we're all excited about here is to really share our insight and understanding of the MCAT with you guys. And so I just want to remind you again to use that question function as we go, and we'll answer as many questions as we can all the way at the end. So we're going to close that poll here and just share with you guys the results to see everybody who's on here. So we have a bunch of people who are taking the MCAT within the next month, a whole lot of people who are taking it 2 to 6 months from now, and then some awesome overachievers who are taking anywhere from 7 months to, who knows, 2, 3, 4 years from now. And that's okay, because we're going to have hints and tricks and really good information for really all of you guys as you go, no matter when you're taking the MCAT. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce our panel. I myself am Sahil. I'm the founder of MedSchoolCoach, as well as an interventional radiologist up in Boston. I'm an instructor at Harvard Medical School and the program director in the interventional radiology program up here. I've been helping students through the MCAT, but really the admissions process for a long time. Myself, I took the MCAT many, many years ago, so I got some people who are much more familiar with the MCAT to help me out today. And starting with Ken. Ken, you want to say hi?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm the Director of MCAT Programming at the MedSchoolCoach. I'm currently a neuroscience graduate student at Harvard University, and I've been an MCAT instructor and tutor for over 5 years, and I'm really happy to be here and look forward to answering your guys' questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Ken. And the next person we have on here is Chloe. Chloe, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi guys, my name's Chloe. So I took the MCAT in September of 2016, so pretty fresh. I scored a 526, and then I graduated from UCLA in June of 2017. So I'm currently in my gap year, and I've spent a lot of it not just tutoring for the MCAT, but really creating the content videos for our self-paced course. So that course is offered by both MedSchoolCoach and Curvesetter, and I have a lot of experience tutoring before that at UCLA. So I'm going to go over 3 main tips today.
Awesome. Thanks, Chloe. And Alex, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey guys, my name is Alex Abedi. I'm a first-year medical student at UCSF. I'm in San Francisco right now, and it's actually pretty sunny, if you can see the sun on my face. I've been doing MCAT tutoring basically since the beginning of the new exam, so I'm not adulterated by the philosophy of the old exam. I took the new MCAT in September of 2015, so just a few months after it came out. And essentially after my scores were released, I started to conduct MCAT tutoring both in classroom settings and one-on-one tutoring, as well as some pro bono tutoring for individuals with disability backgrounds. And once I was ready to apply to medical school, I reached out to Chloe, and we essentially became partners and really expanded our MCAT tutoring division. We looked at deficiencies in other companies and came up with a plan on how to essentially streamline the MCAT preparation process and decide what's important and what's not important, and kind of build out a course from there.
Awesome. So thanks, guys. We're super excited to have Ken, Chloe, and Alex with us. Just for a little bit of background, for those of you guys who don't know, Alex and Chloe have created essentially an awesome video course that they call Curve Setter, and you guys can check it out. MedSchoolCoach is offering that as part of our tutoring programs as well. So Ken has created a tutoring program that's essentially one-on-one focus, but we also include the Curve Setter videos in our course so that you kind of get the best of both worlds. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on and how that may help you guys as you're studying. But the first things I kind of want to talk about are a little bit about how to basically score high. So essentially, I'm going to have all three of our panelists go through some tips and tricks that they learned along the way and that they know along the way. But before that, I want to just give you guys a little bit of a brief overview of what we are going to go over, and as well as what the MCAT in general entails and how an admissions committee might look at that. So I've been doing admissions consulting for over 10 years. I've helped somewhere around 3,000 students myself, and MedSchoolCoach has helped nearly 10,000 students sort of get into med school. So we kind of understand really the specifics of how the MCAT is used by different medical schools in their evaluation process, and how you should kind of go about studying for it and presenting it on your actual application. Now, the bottom line is obviously you want to score as high as possible. That's an easy thing for me to say, but hopefully Alex, Chloe, and Ken are going to give you some insight into how to do that. So we'll talk a little bit about the target scores. We'll talk about how our one-on-one tutoring can help you. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to have that roundtable Q&A. And I highlight that because this is your chance to really ask all the questions that you want of our panelists. So please feel free to drop questions as we go. Again, anything related to MCAT, anything related to pre-med, anything related to life as a pre-med student, whatever you want it to be, even admissions, we can tap on all those things. So let me just go over a few basics. Now, I know a lot of you guys know this already, and some of you may not, so I'm just going to go over it, which is that the MCAT is essentially made up of 4 sections. Remember, the MCAT changed in 2015. It used to be on a scale of 0 to 45. Now it's on a scale of 472 to 528. And if you notice, sort of the middle range there is actually exactly the same. So there's 45 points between those numbers. And so there's not it essentially comes out to a similar overall score range as the old one, but it's just slightly different numbers. Obviously, there's a curve, as there's a curve to any test where the mean is around 500. There's 4 sections all told: the Chem Physics section, the Cars section, the Biochem section, the Psych and Sociology section. Sorry. And all the questions on the MCAT are passage-based, and there are also some freestanding questions as you go through. They're all multiple choice questions. Every question is worth the same amount, and there's no penalty for guessing. Now, these are some bare bones basics of the actual exam, and we'll get into a lot more detail. But I want to open up a quick other poll here, because I think this will help you guys a little bit, which is asking you which section worries you the most about the MCAT. So obviously there's a ton of different sections out there, and some people are very confident in their abilities in one section or the other. Others are not so much. So I just want to get a kind of understanding from our audience today where you guys land. And so here are the results from everybody out there. So the section that worries people the most, physics chem. Actually, I would find that surprising. I think most people, at least in my experience, say the verbal cars section, and we have some awesome cars tips for you coming up. Biology, sociology, psychology, it seems like people are pretty comfortable with, but we're going to go over a whole bunch of different aspects of each of these sections. Now, I want to actually share Chloe's score report here. It's on the Curve Setter website, and you can see that she is literally probably the best MCAT taker in the entire country. And so she's here to answer a bunch of questions for you today. But this is kind of what the score report ends up looking like. You get basically a section, four different scores for 4 different sections out of 132. They give you a little bit of a range and where your percentile lands, and then the total score and where your percentile is amongst the country. So this is what you're going to expect to see when you get your MCAT score back. And certainly if you're scoring this high, amazing. So how do admissions committees look at the MCAT? And, there's so many different things that go into a medical school application, including obviously your personal statement, your letters of recommendation, all the research and volunteer experience you have, your honors and awards, and all those are super important. Don't get me wrong. Every single one of those is extremely important in the entire process. but none of those are filterable. And what I mean by filterable is any medical school gets thousands of applications. So take GW, for instance, which gets 15,000 applications in any given year. As much as they would like to, it is impossible for them to read 15,000 different personal statements and 15,000 times 5 different letters of recommendation and really gain a full understanding of what each and every student is about. It's just not feasible. So they, along with every other school in the country, utilizes some sort of filtering process along the way. And the two things that are filterable are your GPA and MCAT. And so getting beyond those filters, getting your MCAT score as high as possible is just so important, because then the rest of your application actually comes into play. Before that, honestly, if you don't get past those filters, nobody's really reading the remainder of your application. And we could definitely talk a little bit more in depth about that at a later time. But, this is just kind of highlights, I think, just the importance of the MCAT. Now, everybody knows it's important, but some people don't realize just how important it is comparatively to everything else on the board here. So with that, I'm actually going to now turn it over to Ken to go a little bit more in depth. So I'm going to turn it over to each of our panelists sort of in succession, and they're going to go a little bit more in depth into different aspects of actually studying for the MCAT. So this is where you guys out there really want to pay attention, take some notes, and understand what we have to say. So I'm going to turn it over to Ken. Ken is MedSchoolCoach's Director of MCAT Programming. He's actually Princeton Review's former master tutor and teacher trainer there, and he came over to MedSchoolCoach a little bit ago and helping us develop our MCAT program. And so he really has a incredible knowledge of the actual test, as well as how to create an effective study plan. He's going to give you some tips on the cars section, and then basically how to improve your score by 10 points, which I'm interested to hear as well. So Ken, take it away.
All right, thanks, Sahil. So the first thing I want to talk about is how to create an effective study plan. And I'm sure, as all of you know, the MCAT is not an exam that you want to take without studying, and that's primarily because it covers many semesters worth of college courses. And many of these courses you likely took in your freshman or sophomore year, so it's been quite a while since you reviewed a lot of that content. So to create an effective study plan, you'll see the first thing we have on this list is you want to make sure you have adequate time to study. Now, adequate is a very subjective term, and it's not quantitative. We're not telling you have to study X number of hours. And that's because it's important to recognize that scoring well in the MCAT is not like completing a checklist. If you read a set of MCAT books, if you do 1,000 practice questions, if you do 10 full-length practice tests, you aren't guaranteed any particular score on the MCAT. Instead, what you need to be focused on in your studies is obtaining the knowledge and skills that you need to do well on the exam. Now, in terms of the knowledge, that means that you need to do content review. You need to learn the basic science content that is tested on the exam. And there's multiple ways that you can do this. You can read a set of MCAT books. You can watch online videos. You can work with a tutor who can teach you the content. But regardless of what method you choose, you definitely need to make sure your study plan involves content review. A second is the skills. So knowing content is fantastic, but unfortunately, knowing content alone isn't going to allow you to score well in the exam. And that's because the vast majority of questions on the MCAT are associated with a passage. And these passages are going to introduce new information and situations that you've never seen before. And you're going to be asked to apply your knowledge of science to the passage, as well as think critically about the information presented in the passage to answer these questions. And the only way you can really develop these skills is by doing practice questions, practice passages, and practice tests. So it is very important. That is another important component of your study plan. And as you're likely going to hear from us several times today, the best practice questions out there are those created by the creators of MCAT, and those are the questions from the AAMC. So definitely make sure you do those questions. Now, the last important aspect of a study plan is making sure that you can improve. And that is, when you take your first full-length practice test, you're probably not going to get the score you want. Otherwise, you probably don't need to study for the MCAT. But if you're not at the score that you want and you need to improve, you need to make sure that you have an approach that's going to be able to allow you to do that. And the best way to do that is doing an intensive review of all the questions that you got wrong. You need to figure out why did you get those questions wrong, and what do you need to do so you don't get those questions wrong again. So putting these three things together, you can now figure out for yourself how much time you need to complete these things so that you can score well in the MCAT. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is the CARS section. So it's interesting that from the poll, a lot of you said you're struggling with the Chem Phys section, the CARS section, and it's not completely surprising, right? The Chem Phys section is very unique because of the blend of the science topics within that section. And the CARS is really the complete opposite in that there is no science content tested within this section. And we certainly don't have time to give you a comprehensive reviews of how to deal with CARS on the exam, but what we can leave you with is a few tips. So the first thing I want to talk about is making sure that when you read a passage, you read with enthusiasm. And this is very important because if you read a passage and it's on philosophy or it's something about Old English and all you're thinking about is how boring the passage is and how uninterested you are in what the passage is about, then it's going to be very hard for you to engage yourself with the passage text, which is really important for you to do because if you aren't able to do that, then you likely won't be able to capture the main idea of the passage and figure out the author's tone with regard to whatever they're talking about in the passage, both of which are key to getting CARS questions correct. The second thing I want to talk about is evaluating your strategies. So at some point or another, you're going to develop some sort of strategies or techniques that you're going to use for the CARS section. And this could involve your approach to the passage, your approach to the questions, how you're going to highlight the text, how you're going to write down notes from the passage, how you're going to approach and eliminate wrong answer choices. Regardless of what strategies and techniques that you use, it's important that you evaluate them. Now, the one way you can evaluate your strategies and techniques is when you do a practice passage, afterwards, you're of course going to look at which questions you got wrong. But before you go ahead and read the solutions, try to apply your strategies and techniques under conditions where you're not timed. So what I mean by that is, you do a passage and you'll see, oh, I got question 3 wrong. I picked A, the answer was C. So go back to question 3, and now that you have unlimited time, use your strategies and techniques and see if you're still able to figure out the right answer. Because if you have unlimited time and your strategies and techniques still don't work, perhaps there is some flaw to the approach that you're using, and you might want to consider revising your strategies or techniques or possibly consider a new one. And the last tip that I want to talk about for CARS is making sure that you read MCAT CARS-like text regularly. And this is also very important because most pre-medical students are going to be science majors. And as science majors, what you're probably used to reading is biology, chemistry, and physics textbooks, which is not what you're going to be seeing in the MCAT CARS section. So for a lot of students, when they start doing CARS passages, it's very difficult because the topics is very different and the level of difficulty of the text is very different from what they're used to reading. So to help with this, you should try to visit several websites online that provide articles with text similar to what you're going to see on the MCAT CARS section. And by reading these on a regular basis, you'll be able to make yourself more comfortable with the CARS section and ultimately get more questions correct. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about is how to significantly improve your MCAT score. Now, the first thing to know is that a lot of students retake the MCAT. According to the AMC, of all the test takers every year, 30% of all the test takers are people retaking the exam. So there's certainly no shame in retaking the exam because a lot of pre-medical students are doing it. Now, of course, you want to make sure that if you're retaking the exam, you're going to be able to improve your score. Otherwise, there's no point. So to improve your score, the first thing you want to think about is what did you do the first time you did for your studies, right? How did you prepare for your exam? And when you took the exam and you saw your score, think about your approach. Were there any flaws to your approach? Perhaps did you not do enough content review? Did you start practice questions too late? Did you not take enough practice tests to build up the stamina to last the entire duration of the exam? All of these you want to consider. And once you identify some of these issues, then you want to develop an effective approach to address each of these weaknesses in your second rendition of MCAT preparation. And one thing that can be very difficult for students is, a lot of pre-medical students, they're very hardworking students. They'll study an insane number of hours over many, many weeks for the exam and still not get the score they want and really not understand why that's the case. So if you do find yourself in that sort of situation, one thing you can consider is asking for help. And this can be from a variety of people. Certainly you can ask some of your peers that have done well in the exam, or you can, of course, ask for professional help. And by doing so, it can provide insight that perhaps you didn't consider within your studies that you can then consider and basically put into your approach for the second round of studies. And by doing that, you'll have a much higher chance of improving your score significantly.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ken. For those of you guys who are out there and are thinking, man, how am I ever going to get my car scored up to what I need? I just remember when I took my exam years ago at this point, that the verbal section was the hardest section by far for me. And it's a section that I never really tackled well. That said, if you can get yourself to a certain score, utilizing some of the tips that Ken just gave you, and actually some of the tips that Alex is going to give you coming up, as long as you can get to a decent spot, you can still become a doctor. I'm proof of that right here. So I know a lot of you guys may be struggling with the car section. It's definitely the hardest section in my opinion, but stay tuned. We're going to give you even some more tips on that. Before I turn it over to Chloe, I just again wanted to remind you guys, use the question function. I see a lot of great questions already out there. Please ask a bunch of questions as you go, because it's going to allow us to answer them when we get to the question and answer session at the end. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Chloe now. So I've already embarrassed Chloe a little bit with her score, but honestly, she's truly one of the top test takers in the entire country, and she's going to give you some tips to really knock it out of the ballpark here. So Chloe, go for it.
Okay, great. So the first tip I have is you want to have multiple passes through the same material. So I'm sure you guys have heard the saying, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, and the MCAT is definitely a marathon. And what I mean by multiple passes is that you want to revisit those concepts, terms, and formulas that you learn more than once. If you don't do that, what you learned in your first week of studying is going to be basically a faint memory by the time your MCAT comes around. Obviously, that's problematic. It's also a good idea, kind of on the same note, to mix up the subjects that you study from one day to the next. If you did study your subjects in blocks, let's say you started with physics and then you went to chem, let's say you started with physics and you ended with cars, well, by the time you take your test, of course, physics is going to be fuzzy. And so you really need to account for this in your study plan. Otherwise, you're probably not going to do it. If you're anything like me, you say you'll go back to it, but you probably won't unless you really commit to doing that in your study plan. So we have a sample plan in our course, and it kind of lays that out nicely to make sure that you get at least 2 passes through everything, except for the things you learn, of course, in the last week. So why do you want to have multiple passes? Well, it's pretty obvious, but committing high yield content to memory is absolutely crucial for the MCAT. So first, for those who aren't studying right now, what is high yield content? That's content that you're very likely to be tested on, if not once or multiple times on your test. So for example, the classic example is amino acids. So you want to know the names, the structures, the 3-letter abbreviation, and the 1-letter abbreviation. So I've noted these high yield sort of concepts in the videos, but you really need to commit these to memory, because when you sit down to take that test, you're under a lot of pressure and you're under extreme time constraints. And what's going to remain in your mind and be easily retrievable is what you committed to memory. In other words, don't just sit passively and understand the material, but you need to actively engage with it, rehearse it, and commit it to memory. So if that involves flashcards for you, that's great. Just make sure that you're really memorizing those high yield concepts. So for example, when I took it, I had sticky notes around my room. a couple on my mirror in the bathroom. For example, for like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Kohlberg's stages, those things that I was like, how am I ever going to memorize this? Well, I'm brushing my teeth every night and seeing the amino acids. They don't leave your memory. So that's one tip that worked for me. So the second tip is you really need to master the art of remaining calm under pressure. And how do you do that? Well, practice is going to help you. So first, don't shy away from those extremely challenging practice passages that you come across. Instead, you need to embrace those passages. So when I was taking it, at first I sort of dismissed them. I thought, that's too hard, that won't show up. Or I thought, that's a lost cause for me. But you really need to focus on these. These are some of the best practice that you can get. So taking these extremely dense, extremely challenging passages are going to teach you to, it's going to teach you to remain calm, collected, and to not get too frazzled. You need to develop some strategy, if that's a mental strategy or whatever it is, to recollect yourself. So there were times when I was taking really hard practice tests when I got so overwhelmed and it was a practice test, so I paused it. And you can't do that come testing time. So I realized I needed to develop a way to step back, if only for a few seconds, cool down and move forward. So for me, it was just pulling back and taking one long, slow breath. That might seem like a waste of time, but it's really not, because if you're frazzled, the rest of your section is going to be severely impacted. Another important tip is you need to move on from a difficult passage and don't look back. So don't actually go back and don't think or agonize over it. Just move on. And you really don't want to let those really dense and challenging passages hog your time and tank your section score. So that's sort of related to just moving on and don't look back. Okay, so we said practice is really important. So how can you make the most out of your practice materials? Well, as we've said, the AAMC provides a bunch of materials, so not only practice tests, but a question pack and a section bank, and they even have flashcards too. And these are really the holy grail of your practice. Of course, these are most representative in terms of the types of passages and the format of the questions. And you need to learn these practice tests inside and out. So yeah, you won't come across that exact passage again, but you want to learn how those test creators are trying to trip you up, how they formulate the questions, how they're asking you to rely on your content knowledge versus the passage, things like that. And as we've sort of said, you really need to focus on reviewing them. So doing the practice materials is important, but it's much more important to thoroughly review. So for example, if I took a test, it would take, 7.5 hours of breaks on one day. I would spend at least a day and a half reviewing that test very thoroughly. So you want to see, how do they try and trip me up? What did I do wrong? What did I do right? Where are my weaknesses? And especially if you don't know specific content areas well enough, write that down and review it then and there before you forget. This is a really great way to identify where your weaknesses are. And so, do it then and there. Maybe, when I went through my test, I had a packet of notes. And if I didn't know Erickson's stages, I'd write them down and I'd study them that night. And as we've said, when you review these tests, you want to not only really assess the questions you answered incorrectly, but more so the questions you answered correctly, if not more so equally so. A lot of students just skip over, and I did this in the beginning of my studying and just press next. Oh, correct, great. Oftentimes you might not have gotten it correct for the right reasons. So you could have gotten lucky. You could have just vaguely recognized a term that's in that correct answer, but not known the content well enough to, for example, answer a harder question. So don't skip over those questions that you answered correctly. Review them just as much as the questions you answered incorrectly.
Awesome. Thanks, Chloe. The tips that Chloe just gave you there, obviously, Chloe is a phenomenal scorer on the MCAT, but honestly, they pertain to everybody, no matter what score you're looking for on the MCAT. So if you're looking for 526, those tips certainly help. you're looking for a 500 and that's your sort of target score, those tips are going to help you just as much. And I think one of the last things she said is, sort of spending that time on the both correct and incorrect answers is just so important in every medical test you take. The MCAT, the USMLE, step 1, step 2, step 2 CK, step 3, and even your boards, when you eventually go become board certified in this particular specialty, are content related tests, right? These are not necessarily, games or anything along those lines like you might find in the GMAT or even the LSAT. These are content related questions. So the better you know the content, the better you're going to do on the test. And that just goes to reviewing everything, including the questions you get correct, because that's just going to be a refresher of the content over and over and over again. And that's really what you need in order to score well on the test. Awesome. So I'm going to actually turn it over to Alex now, founder of CurveSetter, and he's going to go over some of the questions or some of the best tips and tricks for the cars section. Alex, take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Mehta. So before I get started, actually, there are a couple of things that I noticed that my fellow colleagues had mentioned during their presentations. And, first off, it's very obvious why each of them are in the positions that they are. My neck almost hurts from nodding so often. I legitimately agreed with everything that was said earlier. And usually I don't agree with a lot of people when they give ideas for their ideas for the MCAT. So from a personal perspective, I really enjoyed the kind of the tips that they gave. And actually, before getting to the car section, there are a couple of extra things that I just wanted to mention that I wrote down very quickly while I was listening to the presentations. So after doing almost a full year of preclinical studies at UCSF under this new curriculum that was launched called the Bridges curriculum, there are a couple of things that I've noticed in the curriculum that I really enjoy and I think should be applied, to people who are studying for the MCAT. Just as a kind of a background, this curriculum was very evidence-based. So they essentially did a lot of research and looked at existing literature to see what the most effective way is to train future professionals in not only medicine, but other fields as well. And so within the curriculum, there is a built-in kind of mechanism known as spiraling. You'll hear, my fellow classmates kind of poke around about that term, but it's really important to get multiple passes at the material, just like Chloe said, but to have these passes be separated out during time. So, one of the most effective ways to learn is through a technique known as spaced repetition, in which you get a pass at a certain, material and you learn it, and you allow yourself some time to actually forget that material, and then you come and hit it again. And this constant, learning and forgetting really just burns that into your head, and you won't forget it. At some point, you will reach a point where you will not forget it. And so another point that was made, that was a change in our curriculum, is that all of our exams are now free response. And so, of course, the MCAT and also the boards are not free response. But I think it's a good idea to prepare for the MCAT when you're doing content as if it were a free response exam. And the reason for that is that when you prepare for a free response exam, you are not left any room for recognition. You have to rely solely on recall, and you should be able to actually teach or orally present all the information that you're expected to know. And if you are really able to actually teach that material back, you're going to be in a much better situation when you get to questions that, especially with multiple answer choices that are attempting to confuse you. And so that's a really good way to know whether or not you actually have a good handle of the material, is being able to teach it or orally present it, which is something that we do once we actually hit the wards. And of course, Dr. Mehta can talk about that more. And so I think these themes that I've kind of picked up throughout the last, nearly a year of being in medical school can really apply and enhance your approach to the MCAT. And one last thing that I wanted to mention is that to come up with your own mnemonics when you're studying for the exam, I still have a lot of kind of stupid mnemonics that I made while I was studying, but to this day, I still remember them crystal clear. And you can find mnemonics in books and things like that, but the only ones that really work are the ones that are personal, that are relevant to your own life. And these are actually methods that you are required to learn in the psychology sociology section of the MCAT when it comes to the learning portion of that subject. But coming up with your own personal mnemonics that are tied to your life somehow is a really effective way to make sure that you retain that information over a long period of time. All right, so I'm going to get into the CAR section now. Just as a disclaimer, I scored a 524 on the new exam. I took it after my sophomore year, so just a couple of points shy of Chloe's incredible score. And as far as the CAR section is concerned, I got a 132, so that translates to a perfect score, 100th percentile on that section. I actually wasn't scoring that high when I initially started practice. And I know a lot of people say that the CAR section is the one that's most difficult to improve, and I would agree with that because you won't see a jump initially when you're studying because there isn't a content background that you need to know. It's not like psychology or sociology where there are a lot of terms that you're just not familiar with, and once you do learn those terms, you will have a better idea of what's going on. The CAR section is much more insidious, and there are a lot of underlying themes that you're going to have to pick up when you're attempting to improve your score. And so, I want to preface this with my own personal opinion, and I think the rest of the panelists would agree with me on this, that there are a lot of gimmicky techniques that are out there that you can find with other companies, and kind of like hearsay here and there, and a lot of them are centered around maybe reading the questions first or skimming the passage or things like that. And I personally think that these techniques arise because there is a lot of difficulty improving the score with the CAR section, and some people will kind of get desperate and will try anything that's different from what they're doing. But I think the fundamentals about understanding the exam, understanding each passage is the best way to go. And so that's my second point there, is that the only technique that I will promote and Chloe will promote is truly understanding the passage to the best of your ability. And kind of in tune with what Ken spoke about earlier, is that I actually believe strongly in not timing yourself in the beginning. Just so when you're first taking CARS practice exams, just forget about time. Okay. Eventually, you can work up to a point where you will be finishing the exam within the specified time period. But when you're first jumping into it, you have the time constraint and you kind of don't know what's going on. It's really difficult to target what's actually leading to poor results. And so I would say that the most important thing is to really, truly try to understand every single sentence that's written on each passage. And of course, not every sentence is going to make sense. But try your best. And so something that I started off with was I would actually summarize kind of what was going on in each paragraph that I would read, and I would attempt to create a main idea out of each summary. And stringing those summaries together and looking for the movement that's made within the passage, I think is a really effective way of getting an idea of what's going on. And so really when you first open up a passage, read the first sentence. That's usually a very important pointer to what's going to be said throughout the rest of the passage, and then go in line by line and try to create a main idea that you will actually see morph and change as you move on. And so in that tune, I really think that the main idea, getting that down, is the best way to score well on the exam. And so I'm going to go so far as to say that when you get to the answer choices and you've come up with your main idea and you've seen how it's changed towards the final paragraph or final few sentences, I would say that you should never ever choose an answer choice that contradicts that main idea. So it's really funny when you read a lot of answer choices. Oftentimes you'll choose one that sounds better than the correct answer. but that incorrect answer will just include some words or sentences that is in opposition with the main idea. And so, oftentimes it's your job to just choose the answer choice that is the least incorrect. So choose the one that is the hardest to prove incorrect. And a lot of times these seem like kind of soft answers, middle of the road, have a few nuances in them, but you read it and you go like, hey, I don't really know if I can say this one's wrong. But you're able to kind of go through the other answer choices and say those are wrong, and pick a word out of here, and like that's just something the author wouldn't agree with. And so when you're choosing your answer choice, there are two things you want to look at, and this applies to really every section. I try to treat every section I go through like a car section, even this biology and physics sections. And so when you're choosing your final answer, you want to check off two things off your list. One, is that answer choice internally correct? So is what that answer choice says actually, is that right? Is that right within the purview of the passage? Does it contain factual information? And number two, always remember to choose an answer that actually answers the question. So a lot of times there will be answer choices that are internally correct, but they don't actually answer the question. So check those two things off, and I think you'll be in a good position.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Those are, again, awesome tips for the car section and beyond. So, a lot of people ask the question, what is a good MCAT score? And I wish I could give you a simple answer. I mean, obviously a 5.4 or 5.6 is a pretty damn good MCAT score, but that's unattainable for a lot of people. And so, a good MCAT score is really determined on a few different things, including, what your GPA is, what your goals are, where you want to try to attend school. There's so many factors that go into answering that question of what is a good MCAT score. We just put this chart in here because this breaks down your MCAT and GPA by acceptance rate to U.S. medical schools. And this kind of gives you an idea, which is obvious that, the lower your GPA, the higher your MCAT score needs to be in order to be competitive for medical school. But you can kind of see that once you get into the 506 to 510 range, and if your GPA is 3.6 and above, now you have better than a coin flip chance of getting into medical school. Whereas everything else, kind of below that region, you're kind of, 50-50 on if you get in or worse than that. So typically when I look at an applicant and they tell me, what MCAT score should I aim for in order for me to be confident that I can get into a USMD school, there's a lot of different factors that I need to go over before I can give you a exact answer. What's your ethnicity? What schools are you looking at? What state are you from? What's your GPA? What extracurriculars do you have? All these things go into that. But if I was to come out with a very, very general answer, I would say, let's aim for a 510 to 515. And that's, a good enough score for us to be competitive. Now, again, lots of variables within there, but that's sort of approximately what I would say for those of you who are just have no idea where to even start. So I'm going to turn it over to Ken for 1 second. But before I do that, I just want to kind of get an idea from all you folks out there who are going to be taking the MCAT. How do you plan on taking the MCAT? How do you plan on studying for it? What is your strategy in terms of who you're going to use, what you're going to use in going about it? Obviously, there's plenty of people who use a mixture of these things. But just want to kind of get an idea of how people are going out there and studying for it. So a lot of people will be self-studying, essentially, I guess, reviewing the material yourself. A lot of people who are looking at commercial courses, obviously there's a lot of good commercial courses out there, Kaplan, Princeton Review, there's tons and tons of commercial courses. The big names are all out there and they are effective to an extent. Don't get me wrong, they've been around for a number of years. There's obviously a lot of new self-paced online courses like the Curve Setter, where you can actually go in and kind of just review the content on your own, pause the videos when you need, restart the videos when you need. And then there are people who do private tutoring and one-on-one tutoring. And we combine at MedSchoolCoach, the Curve Setter self-paced online video course, plus that one-on-one tutoring to really get you what we think is the biggest advantage. So, lots of great ways to potentially study for the MCAT. There's no one perfect way. Obviously, every single student has a little bit different personality and what they need. But what I want to ask Ken to do a little bit is talk just for a second, a few minutes about how one-on-one tutoring may fit into your individual MCAT plan. So Ken, you want to take it away?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm going to be talking more specifically about is going to be the MCAT tutoring program that we offer at MedSchoolCoach, and that's largely because the tutoring programs are going to be different depending on which company you're working with. So specifically what we offer within our tutoring program is we have two main components. The first, of course, is you're going to have tutors that you're going to be working with. And the second is you're going to have access to this video course developed by Alex and Chloe. Now, for our tutors, what you should know about our tutors is that they're all absolutely fantastic. All of our tutors are required to have taken the MCAT exam and have done phenomenal on the MCAT exams. And that's important to us because we don't want tutors who haven't taken the MCAT exam because they don't know what the exam is like. They don't know what you need to know from MCAT. They don't know the format of the MCAT, and they can't walk you through the process because they haven't been through it themselves. The next important requirement for our tutors is we don't only look for people that have scored well on the exam because, people who are good test takers are not necessarily good teachers. So we're also very rigorous about the way that we screen through all of our tutor applicants, that we want to make sure these are people who are very smart, but are also able to communicate their knowledge to other people. So all of our tutors are extremely smart and they are extremely good at teaching students. And the other component of our tutoring program is the video course that you've been hearing about from the curve setters. And there are a lot of different, video courses out there, but I do want to highlight why this course that has been developed is, particularly amazing. And the first thing you'll notice on the slide is that it was designed in 2018. And you'll see a lot of the courses developed by the other test prep companies. They're using videos that they created from the old MCAT and they're repurposing them for the new MCAT, saying that this is for the new MCAT when really you'll see several of these videos were made years ago. A second important component about these videos is what Alex and Chloe did is they went through the AMC content outlines, which is this giant PDF document with a full list of all the topics that are tested on the MCAT, and they made sure within the videos that they covered every topic on that list. So when you go through this video course, you'll know for sure that you'll have gone through all of the content that you'll need to know for the exam. And there are also videos that Alex recorded of himself walking through CARS passages. So you can really see for yourself, through the eyes of a 132 score, how they would approach a CARS passage. So those are the two main components of our tutoring program. Now, in terms of how tutoring can help you succeed on the MCAT, there are several key things that you should know. The first thing, and which is really the greatest thing about tutoring, is that it's completely personalized to the student. And that is, we see students with different situations all the time. So perhaps students who haven't taken all of their pre-medical courses yet. So perhaps they haven't taken organic chemistry or physics or biochemistry, or it's a student who English is not their first language, or this is a student who is a slow test taker, a slow reader, just about every possible unique situation you can think of. We have worked with these students and we have successfully helped them achieve their target scores. So in order for us to do this, we are able to create a personalized study plan for the student to address whatever weaknesses that they have. Now, the second part is we have the best tutors, and this we've already talked about, so I won't talk more about that. But an excellent result of having excellent tutors is that it leads to more efficient studying. And a couple examples is, first of all, you probably have encountered at some point when you're studying for your college courses, there's this topic that you didn't really understand. And, perhaps you spent a whole week just trying to read the text or find videos online until you finally figured it out. And the great thing about working with a tutor is that they can just teach it to you. So you don't have to spend all those hours figuring it out for yourself. And another great thing about a tutor who is an MCAT expert is that a lot of pre-medical students don't know what they need to do to prepare for the MCAT. So when you work with one of our tutors, we'll give you a complete personalized plan, telling you this is the material you should be using for your content review. These are the practice questions you should be doing, and when in your schedule, when should you be starting these questions, and so forth. And of course, I've already been highlighting the fact that when you're working with a tutor, they're going to be able to help you succeed. They're going to address your weaknesses. You're going to see your scores go up. That's going to help build your confidence, and ultimately, you're going to become a better test taker, which will help you not only with MCAT, but possibly in medical school as well. So now, how it actually works is once you're set up with a tutoring program with us, we'll make sure that we pair you up with a tutor that works for you. So making sure a tutor that can address your particular needs and also has availability that matches your schedule. And once you set up with a tutor, your first tutoring session will be a discussion about your strengths and your weaknesses and your goals, so we can develop an effective study plan for you. And from there, your tutoring sessions are going to be either going over content that you had difficulty understanding or going over practice passages and practice questions together to help you with the strategies and skills that you need for the exam. And through this approach, we find that our students on average improve their scores by 10 points. Now, this 10 points is either from a prior MCAT score or from a diagnostic test that they take at the beginning of their tutoring, because of course not all students have taken the MCAT before, so that's where those numbers are coming from. And the last thing I want to talk about is that for our tutoring program, we are absolutely dedicated to the success of our students. So, we really want to make sure that our students succeed and are happy. So if I Okay.
Sorry, Ken, I hit the mute button by mistake, but you're back on.
Okay, sorry about that. All right, so we're absolutely dedicated to our students succeeding on the MCAT, and also, them being happy with the tutors they're working with. So at any point, any of our students aren't happy with the tutors, we'll immediately set them up with another tutor and do that as needed until the student is with a tutor they're happy with. And if any student doesn't actually improve their score, we will work with the student for additional hours free of charge. Though I will say that we have yet to do this because, so far our program has been very, very successful.
Awesome. Thanks, Ken. I think that's a great overview of obviously what our MCAT program can provide. And just for those of you guys who are out there who are going to be studying, again, lots of great options for you. There are tons of courses out there. There are even a bunch of different private tutoring options out there. What we really feel like we've done is brought together an awesome course plus amazing tutors to kind of give you guys a complete solution to the MCAT from start to finish. And a solution that's going to be so much more effective than we think sitting in a classroom with 35 other people going over material either you've already seen or maybe you don't understand, and they spend the same amount of time on that as they do on material that you do understand. So that's why we feel like classroom courses aren't necessarily as effective. And so what we do at MedSchoolCoach is really try to hone in on your individual weaknesses, your individual strengths, and figure out how to best make your score improve truly in this personalized, customized approach. You guys can feel free to check out the website, medschoolcoach.com/MCAT for more information on the MCAT course as well as the Curve Setter program. You can always drop us an email or call us. We'd love to answer your questions. Right now, what I want to do is actually open up our roundtable Q&A. And this is oftentimes the best part of our webinars because people have been asking questions, and I encourage you to keep asking questions as you go. I have a list of about 200 questions already out there that I'm going to fire away at some of our MCAT experts and ask them what their opinions are. And so basically, guys, keep your questions coming. So we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to all of them. I'll tell you that right now, but we'll try to get to as many as we can. So let me start by Chloe. Why don't I ask you this question? There's a bunch of questions that are going around that are talking about, hey, I am more than 12 months away from studying for the MCAT. There's even one person who's 4 years away from studying for the MCAT. What do you think is the best preparation for somebody who's 12 plus months away from studying for the MCAT today?
Yeah, so I think really good preparation for cars is, as has been said, start reading cars-like passages online. I know a lot of people are science majors, so you're not reading dense philosophy passages. Um, I read in my free time, and I found that that was extremely helpful, those skills that I had developed. But a lot of people don't read in their free time. So get some dense book, or find these dense sort of literature passages online and start reading those. If you're in pre-med courses like physics, biochemistry, biology, make sure to commit yourself to those. You know, don't just cram and dump, but space your studying in those classes, and that material will be much better retained by the time it comes around to study for the MCAT.
Awesome. Alex, you got any advice for people who are, let's say, 12 months or let's say even 2 years away from the MCAT?
Sure. I think some of the things Chloe said, definitely ring true with me. I wanted to echo how important it is to actually do well in your preclinical courses. There is a very good correlation, well, your pre-med classes, sorry. There's a very good correlation between how well you did in your pre-med classes and how well you'll actually do on the MCAT. And so just like Chloe said, don't cram for your exams or think it's not going to be important and that you'll relearn it. When the MCAT comes, I would say try to do your best in your pre-med courses. Of course, your GPA is extremely important as well when it comes to admissions. One thing that you can also do to augment your studying is actually, maybe pick up a few MCAT books or a course well in advance. And what you can do is actually watch or read these videos alongside your classes. And what that will do is it'll give you the perspective of the MCAT, and it will highlight what the MCAT feels is important and what the MCAT feels is not important. And just having that early exposure to the material in that realm will make you a lot more comfortable when you're actually ready to sit down and study for content during the dedicated test prep period after you finish your pre-med classes.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Ken, I got a question for you from one of our webinar participants who says, I was thinking about sitting for a practice MCAT test at the actual session and then canceling my score. What do you think of that idea?
I actually think that's a fine idea. It can help with a couple things. So the first is test anxiety. So it doesn't help, to hear that the MCAT is an exam that may decide whether or not you get into medical school. And that can bring a lot of anxiety to students. So if that's something you're concerned about, then that is something you can consider doing. Another thing that's very helpful about sitting in on an MCAT is you'll be able to see for yourself, based off the content you reviewed and what you see on the exam. For instance, you might see that there are a bunch of biochemistry questions and a bunch of content that you didn't know you actually needed to know. So I can kind of give you some insight before you take your actual exam that you're going to score. What are some additional topics you want to make sure you review?
Okay, cool. Alex, here's a question. Somebody has a question that says, my weakest subject is cars. I'm able to eliminate 2 of the answers, but have a hard time selecting between the last 2 answer choices. Any suggestions for somebody who's having trouble trying to find the right answer between the last 2?
Yeah, it's a really tough question, and that's something that I've, and I'm sure Chloe and Ken can attest to as well, and Dr. Mehta, that's one of the hardest things to do. It always feels like it comes down to 2 answer choices. But when it does, well, first of all, your odds are good. So if you're able to knock out 2 answer choices right off the bat, that's really good. You're in a good spot. So when you get to that point, I would take a deep breath and say, okay, my odds are looking pretty good, even if it were just up to chance. And then what I would do is just read each answer choice word for word. So just slow down, lock into that question, and read each word within the choice one by one, and look for the flaws. So you're supposed to be like a detective. If you guys watch that show Monk, you want to look for like any adulteration, any mistake within that answer choice, because I guarantee you the wrong answer will always have something messed up with it. Whether it doesn't answer the question or whether it contains some information that goes against what the author would endorse. That's really what I would look for. So just slow down, read each answer choice word for word, read the question again, and kind of actually try to separate yourself for a second and put yourself in the author's shoes and say, which one would I pick if I were this author? Would I agree with this choice, or would I agree with the next one?
Awesome. Chloe, there's a question out there that says, what do you think is the best way to go about reviewing content? This person has been using flashcards and trying to draw big picture scenarios and also doing questions after passages, but it just feels kind of stuck. So is there one or two tips that you can have about just reviewing content, or maybe drilling in that high yield content that you can talk about?
Yeah, so everyone is a little different in terms of what technique is most effective for them studying wise, but what I found extremely effective for me and for a number of my students is when you go through and first learn that material. So let's say you purchased our course, you're watching the video, and you have the slides. So you have the slides or you have a book. I would recommend, if you're this type of studier, which a lot of my students and a lot of my peers are, write your own notes, writing it in your own words, and then going back to your own sort of transcript, obviously not word for word, but in your own words, and kind of summarizing it, drawing your own diagrams. That's first extremely effective way to drill it in the first time. But when you're going back and looking at the way you decided to summarize it and the way you decided to write about that concept, I think it sort of brings those concepts back into your memory more efficiently, rather than just looking back at the book and the way those, or the slides and the way those people wrote it. You really want to look back at your notes. If you just jotted down some summary notes, that's going to be helpful too.
Awesome. Ken, here's a question, which is basically revolving around the amount of time one should spend studying for the MCAT. Any quick tips on that?
So the amount of time is going to depend on the student. There are some students that can study for 3 weeks and do great, and other students that can study for years and still not get to their score. So again, you want to make sure that when you study that you're really results driven, that, if you read a chapter of a book, it's not like you read it and the next day you completely forgot everything. You need to make sure that, whatever you read, you actually retain that information. And for some people, that's just they read the chapter of the book. For others, they need to read and highlight the text. And for others, maybe they need to read, highlight, and possibly even take notes while they're reading. So, keeping these in mind, the amount of hours that a student will need to study to achieve their target score is going to vary considerably. Now, I know that's not a particularly satisfying answer, so I can say, what we find with the students that we work with that do well on the exam, on average, our students are studying about 300 hours. And of course, there is quite a range within there, but, several hundred hours is definitely pretty reasonable.
Awesome. Alex, there's a lot of people who are talking about potentially taking the MCAT before they've finished all their prerequisite courses. So a couple of people have talked about Orgo 2 in particular being a course that they haven't taken yet, but are preparing for the MCAT anyway, are going to take it before they do it. Other people, like Physics Lab 2 has been out there. What do you recommend to people who maybe haven't taken the prerequisite courses in terms of their studying? Or do you recommend that everybody finish all their prerequisite courses before they actually take the MCAT?
That's a great question, Dr. Mehta, and that's something that I struggled with myself when I was preparing for the exam. I knew going in that I didn't want to take a gap year, and so that's why I set up my exam to be taken in the summer following my sophomore year. So after I finished my second year at UCLA, I decided to study for the exam. And essentially the way that UCLA was set up was that it was essentially impossible for me to take biochemistry without having finished all the other organic chemistry courses. And I wasn't able to do that. I took organic chemistry in my last quarter in the spring of my sophomore year. And so I had to study for biochem on my own. And, I definitely would say that it's much more challenging not having that class under your belt. OChem 2, there are a lot, you might not see explicit questions as often anymore on the new administration, the MCAT, when it comes to OChem 2. But the underlying principles are very important for actually understanding biochem as well. How compounds come together to form a big, beautiful macromolecule that has various functions, whether it's a protein or carbohydrate or lipid. And so, I would say try your absolute best to take that class before you sit for the MCAT. This isn't, the MCAT is not something to mess around with. You want to do your absolute best. Your first try, of course, if you need to take the MCAT more than once, it's not the end of the world. But you want to score your absolute best and really just go for it at the first shot. And so I would say if you know yourself to be a very self-motivated individual, and that you'll be able to pick up one of the books, the review books on organic chemistry or whatever subject you're struggling with that you haven't taken explicitly in undergrad, then maybe you will be able to do okay. From my own personal perspective, if I could change one thing, I would have went back and actually took biochemistry, but it just wasn't an option for me, and I understand that that's something that might be the case for you as well. So try your best to take the course in advance, and if you don't, then you're really going to have to do a lot of outside learning. That's in addition to what's said in the review courses that you take.
Awesome. So there's a couple other questions out there. I mean, actually, there's about 100 other questions out there. Unfortunately, we're not going to get to all of them. There's a couple of questions, though, that revolve around, I have a month and a half till my test and my scores aren't improving, or I only have a couple of weeks till my test. Can you guys help? And I'm just going to answer that and say, yes, absolutely. Even if you have a month or a month and a half until your test, I think that our course combined with the curve setter videos and sort of that private one-on-one tutoring can really help you boost your score substantially in that last month. And we harped on how important the MCAT is. It really is super important. Not scoring well in the MCAT, unfortunately, will leave you out of medical school, which will, preclude you from being a doctor. And so it's really to your benefit to kind of put your all into studying for it, getting the materials and resources you need, and getting the help you need. And we at MedSchoolCoach certainly provide that and have helped just thousands of students get into medical school and know what it's going to take and can help you as well sort of boost your score, particularly in that last month. For those of you guys who are further out than that, obviously we're here for you as well, and the longer we can work with you, the better. So with that, I'm actually going to, it's now past 10 o'clock here on the East Coast, so we're going to wrap things up. I really want to thank Alex, Chloe, and Ken for taking the time to join us tonight and sharing, their incredible insights. I want to thank all you guys out there for tuning in. I know it's late for some of you guys, but I hope this has been helpful. Lots of questions on if a recording is available, and yes, the recording will be available. We're going to send you an email regarding what to do to get that recording, so just keep an eye out on your email. As always, you can contact us at MedSchoolCoach.com. Feel free to shoot us an email, give us a call, and we'd love to help you. So Alex, Chloe, and Ken, one more time, thank you so much for joining in and taking your time. I know all the students who logged in appreciate it greatly. So with that, we're going to end the webinar now. Again, thanks everybody for joining in, and we hope you found that helpful. Good luck when it comes to taking the MCAT. Good luck when it comes to applying to medical school. We're here for you. If you guys need us, just check us out at MedSchoolCoach.com. And everybody have a great night. Thanks so much.